Okay, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Out of the Blue, a podcast about all the great things that are happening inside the Faculty of Industrial Design and Engineering at Delft University of Technology. We're here today at the party of our 50th symposium, and we have some very special people. So let me first introduce our guest, Kevin Shahbazi. Hello.
Hello.
And we now also have a guest podcast host who's also quite experienced, Frithjof Wegener, who's also does a Talking About Organizations podcast, which you should also listen to.
Thank you.
Say hello.
Hello.
All right. And today you had a sort of a keynote speaker moment, and I hope you enjoyed doing that. You were quite nervous.
I was.
But perfectly groomed. So, to introduce, Kevin Shahbazi used to do a master here. Well, let me talk. So, tell me about your sort of career and how you got it.
Okay, I'll do my own bio. I studied at the Industrial Design Engineering faculty here. I did integrated product design, but secretly I was an SPD type of a guy. And I did my graduation thesis at Philips Design on how to make their male grooming business and consumer lifestyle businesses more broadly, more circular.
Yeah.
And from it I got a job at Philips. And now I work at the Board of Innovation in Antwerp.
And we're getting new champagne.
Yeah, that's great.
All right. Now you work at the Board of Innovation in Antwerp.
Yep. They're just called Board of Innovation.
Board of Innovation.
Just to mess with you. Yeah.
Wonderful. So before I let Frithjof ask a question, I'm really interested in the process. So you talked about your graduation project.
Yeah.
And at some point there was a box under the bed with a sort of a razor that was not used anymore, together with, can you tell me what else was in the box and how did you find it?
I think there was an old modem in the box, but let me first give some context behind this. So I studied, indeed, looking at shavers to try and understand how to make that whole business more circular. And I first discovered that the product may be not the most critical piece in the whole problem, that the actual business model behind them, that we sell them and then we kind of forget about the consumers, that might actually be more key. So I went to address the question, how do these become waste and where do they end up? And I used ethnographic research methods to guide myself there. And what I did was I think I just put kind of an open call on who has an electric shaver, and I think more than X months old, and went in their homes and just did different probing through different questionnaires to try and understand their journey so far. And I think one of the guys I interviewed, I asked, like, do you have any broken shavers or anything that, like, is this your first shaver? Where's your other one? And he goes, oh, I have it. And he pulls out this box, this cardboard shoebox under his bed somewhere. It's been 5 years, so forgive me if the details are wrong.
Sure.
In it, I think there's a modem, and it's basically in the place of his house where even some of his ex-girlfriend stuff is stashed as well. So I learned about this behavior, which I kind of called Ostrich behavior.
Yeah, Ostrich, right?
Yeah.
So I know a guy who bought art but didn't want to tell his wife, so he had it all in his car. He had basically a car filled with old art.
See how people are so funny. With our different needs and conflicting needs, we actually have these very funny behaviors that are totally understandable if we understand how people think and act. So that's where his product ended up, and it just stayed there under his bed or in his room. And my hypothesis would be that if he's moving or so forth, that is the moment where it would enter the waste stream, where he gets build up of frustration of no one came to take it away now. I can still be a good person and throw it out now because I waited. I mourned through the years of it being broken.
Yeah. So before we get into the result of what you did, I must say you just said you were sort of a strategic product designer tendency. But I must say that if you talk about ethnographic research and you talk about probing, then basically you're getting into design for interaction territory here.
Yeah,
right?
But I think this faculty is the only person or entity that sees the divisions between the three.
That's
I don't.
Nice. And I don't see division either.
Yeah.
I think that's nice. Like about when we look at your background, you started with IPD, and that indeed you joked before that the approach that you took in that sense is very much DFI, but then your interest is really SPD.
Yeah.
And I think that really nice reflects the history of this faculty. That we started out, so to say, really focusing on the product, focusing on these, in that sense, very like the nuts and bolts, which are really important. But then, so to say, enlarging it to understand, but the product is also being used, and that use is actually also something important to consider, both before we actually design something, but also after we design something, and how to take care of that. But then, what I really liked about your I guess keynote was that you brought in this SPD element. That it is indeed like even in your analysis that you see like in the end it's really very much the business model, and that we're stuck in these old ways of business models because. The example you gave, for example, was that even an accounting function suddenly has something to say about business models. As if designers learned about accounting and could tell accounting, hey, but you should do it this way or that way. Well, we don't really learn that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think it's important to be humble as designers. We do not know how every single piece of an organization works. Not even the CEO knows this. And we need to allow for every piece, an actor in an ecosystem or in a business, to adapt their role. And sometimes these actors are stubborn, and sometimes these actors are confused, because what we're saying with circular economy could be recycling, but it could also be sharing or lease models, which are totally different things for an accountant. So there's a lot of concrete challenges that we have with respect to organizations as designers, who in my view, as a kind of maybe more obvious point, have a facilitator role, but I also think a leadership role. They should face these, and I didn't really learn about them, but I also studied IPD, so maybe had I picked another course I would have learned about it.
So one of the things that I was wondering about your background is that you spent in that sense a lot of time at Philips.
Yeah.
And can you tell us something about your role as a designer at Philips and what you learned after you finished your graduation year at Philips? Or the other way around, what should we teach students to prepare them to be designer in a large corporation like Philips?
Well, firstly, I have to say that I had some of the best years at Philips. 5 years I worked there, and including my graduation, and I was given a really interesting assignment. I mean, I basically graduated there, and after a couple months of being on a kind of trial via an Uitzendbureau, they hired me and said, all right, you know what you did with your graduation? Yeah, just keep doing that. So I had a very, very vague assignment coming in to just try and work on circular economy, whatever that meant. And in that respect, I'm extremely grateful that they are a company who likes to embrace innovation and take risks and respect individuals' ability to contribute. And also it was a huge assignment with a lot of dead ends for me as an individual. So I had to learn, how do you actually craft this role and what does it actually mean? And I think every year I thought it meant something very different. And first I thought it was, my role is to push circular economy innovations, to think about them and to validate them and to help them get to the market. And I realized I was kind of going up against a lot of different barriers in my company. That the innovations we came up with were like kind of coming out of a bubble, and no one planned for these, and they weren't in the budget, and if they were to grow, then too many people had to take their time on it and no one ever heard of them. So there was that bottom-up scaling challenge. There was maybe it wasn't aligned with the top-down strategy sometimes, because those are happening in very many different places of the company, and I wasn't in the boardrooms as just a lowly designer first entering the company. So that was also very new. And we made this shift to thinking about how do we enable these pipelines which are already there of innovation with the tools so that their output becomes more circular. So how does a team which is working on a healthcare innovation end up through their process coming up with a circular healthcare innovation? And that was a nice revelation and helped me understand my role a bit better in that. There was a lot of enabling teams, running workshops, fixing and modifying tools, taking abstract concepts and making them into playful things for people. There was also a lot of running workshops with their managers so that to help them think different and understand opportunities that they should actually invest in. there was a lot of things I did, but I didn't understand why I did them until later. And it was always when I did random things that I later understood that was really essential to creating the wiggle room for something else to happen. I still don't understand what happened.
We were just talking about creating a window. And I guess one of the common interests that we have is organizational change. I'm doing a PhD here at the faculty within the PIM department, the Product Innovation Management department, on organizational designing. And one of the things I'm really curious about is how to create these opportunities for change in organizations, because a lot of times the change is not really so obvious how to do it, and there's also a timing issue. That there's opportune moments to do something, and then if you don't do something at that moment, you lose it. And how did you, being a designer, help you in finding these moments?
Well, I think innovation is all about change, right? Innovation, Nova. And as a designer, that meant that I was gravitating towards the edge of that change. And I had to learn about organizational change because I had to understand what was stopping the concepts from progressing. And therefore I learned a lot of it from the school of hard knocks, so to speak. And what was the other aspect of the question?
What I was wondering, I was trying to explain that organizational change, it's quite complex. It's not like there's a straightforward process to follow.
How to do it.
And that sometimes, like the cliche is, but exactly. But it also, what I mean is like it takes the understanding that the being with the boss now in the lift is the moment to pitch to him something that could actually meaningfully change something, and that you were talking about this window of opportunity.
Well. What I learned is that every bottom-up initiative, I guess, if they want to, they can try to fend for themselves, and in a Dutch culture, that's often what happens. But I don't think that's the most productive to creating a sustainable organizational change. I think what I learned is that it's important to have a clear vision, a top vision, that it doesn't matter how that vision is produced, if it's co-created, also with bottom-up initiatives, or if it's 100% top-down, so long as everyone is behind it. Usually collaboration is the best way to get there. A shared vision, which is specific enough to help people make decisions without telling them how to get there. And every year at Philips, that top-down vision got a little bit better. It started when I joined with Frans van Houten saying, circular economy is very important for us. And that's kind of what gravitated me towards Philips. But it turns out that's too abstract, and that's not clear, and that can be 1,000 things. So it's still too vague, and people tripped over toes trying to make that up, or I at least tripped over toes. So it got clearer and clearer what that meant without dictating what that step needs to be. So that's the one aspect. Make sure you have a shared vision that everyone gets, that leaves room for people to figure out their piece in it. The second aspect, I think, which is important is monitoring is the wrong word, but having the leaders being in tune with what is going on at the bottom-up scale so that you can find those things that are organically growing or even inorganically growing outside and nurture them and support them and carry them to the next level. There were so many times where some of the random things I did led to the right person in the room hearing what I was saying and just inviting me to the right platform to just literally say the same thing again. And I needed them to just pick me up like in The Sims and drop me off in another place and do the same thing. And that was important to an investment decision. So you need these two things at least. And maybe there are more things, but I'm still learning them.
All right, so we almost have to finish it up. There's one small thing. Now you're working at the Board of Innovation. I think that means you're sort of more external than within an organization. Are you still able to make impacts? Because you cannot do the elevator pitch and the monitoring when you have 10 clients from a distance.
I mean, I could tell you what I think, but it's my 9th day. So
it's your
5th day?
You're just there.
So just started. But I think it's going to be hard.
That's going to be hard, right?
On the plus side, the organizations that come to us are already bought in on the need for change. There are a lot of inbound marketing, and I hope this leads to it too. Just kidding, but also not kidding.
You're always doing marketing.
No, because really we need to make a change in the society, and I think
You're
I
not
think we
driven
need
by
all the
growing
help
the
we
company, but by spreading your vision, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So finally,
okay.
to get to the finish, do you have one tip for the audience that they can sort of look at, read, something they can do actionable based on what you just, so a book or a movie or a thing that inspires you?
I have a few things.
Go.
I have a few topics, a few things to suggest. The book Products That Last by Connie Becker and Marcel Den Hollander.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's it's newer, but it's classic. I think in this area it inspired my thinking, and I think that that's a good basis for continuation. I also, from the people side of things, I read everything coming out of HBR, Harvard Business Review.
Yeah.
There are so many things that you think might be just kind of for boring businesses that are actually all about how do people work together and how can you get them to be more innovative, that are fascinating, and designers can just pick those things and integrate them into their work. And I guess also, those are the
let's keep it at that.
That's good enough.
So thank you very much for doing for taking the time to meet with us.
Thank
You
you.
should get back into the party. Oh, one thing.
Yeah, the last thing was the tools of the Board of Innovation. And I'm not saying this just because I worked there. When I worked at Philips, I borrowed, stole, used their tools the whole time because I think they have a really visual way, and that's of drawing business models that is good for designers to figure out how can I actually start to change the businesses of today. And that was part of the reason I was interested in joining them.
Yeah, and these are available on their website.
They're free.
So
They're
boardsofinnovation.com.
www.boardsofinnovation.com.
just get them.
Boardsofinnovation.com.
Wonderful.
This is a shameless plug, but,
but that's
I really
good.
mean it.
But that's how you got there, right?
Yeah, it's really true.
So that's your path. Thank you very much for talking
you.
to us. And
Thank you.
enjoy the party.
Thank you.